It was so sudden and so horribly unlike anything that had ever happened to Diggory, even in a nightmare, that he let out a scream. Instantly, Uncle Andrew's hand was over his mouth. "None of that," he hissed in Diggory's ear. "If you start making a noise, your mother'll hear it, and who knows what a fright might do to her." As Diggory said afterwards, the horrible meanness of getting a chap in that way almost made him sick, but of course he didn't scream again. "That's better," said Uncle Andrew. "Perhaps you couldn't help it. It is a shock when you first see someone vanish. Why, it gave me a turn when the guinea pig did it the other night." "Was that when you yelled?" asked Diggory. "Oh, you heard that, did you? I hope you haven't been spying on me." "No, I haven't," said Diggory indignantly. "But what's happened to Polly?" "Congratulate me, my dear boy," said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands. "My experiment has succeeded. The little girl's gone, vanished, right out of the world." "What have you done to her?" "Sent her to another place." "What do you mean?" asked Diggory. Uncle Andrew sat down and said, "Well, I'll tell you all about it. Have you ever heard of old Mrs. Le Fay?" "Wasn't she a great aunt or something?" said Diggory. "Not exactly," said Uncle Andrew. "She was my godmother. That's her, there on the wall." Diggory looked and saw a faded photograph. It showed the face of an old woman in a bonnet, and he could now remember that he'd once seen a photo of the same face in an old drawer at home in the country. He'd asked his mother who it was, and Mother had not seemed to want to talk about the subject much. It was not at all a nice face, Diggory thought, though of course with those early photographs one could never really tell. Wasn't there something wrong about her, Uncle Andrew?" he asked. "Well," said Uncle Andrew with a chuckle, "it depends on what you call wrong. People are so narrow-minded. She certainly got very queer in later life, did very unwise things. That's why they shut her up." In an asylum, do you mean?" "Oh, no," said Uncle Andrew in a shocked voice. "Nothing of that sort. Only in prison." "I say," said Diggory, "what had she done?" "Ah, poor woman," said Uncle Andrew. "She'd been very unwise. There were a good many different things. We needn't go into all of that. She was always very kind to me." "But look here, what has all this got to do with Polly? I do wish you'd—" "All in good time, my boy," said Uncle Andrew. "They let old Mrs. Le Fay out before she died, and I was one of the very few people whom she would allow to see her in her last illness. She'd got to dislike ordinary, ignorant people. You understand. I do myself. But she said she and I were interested in the same sort of things. It was only a few days before her death that she told me to go to an old bureau in her house and to open a secret drawer and bring her a little box that I would find there. The moment I picked up that box, I could tell by the pricking in my fingers that I held some great secret in my hands. She gave it me and made me promise that as soon as she was dead, I would burn it, unopened with certain ceremonies. That promise I did not keep." "Well, that was jolly rotten of you," said Diggory. "Rotten?" said Uncle Andrew with a puzzled look. "Oh, I see. You mean that little boys ought to keep their promises. Very true. Most right and proper, I'm sure. And I'm very glad you've been taught to do it. But of course you must understand that the rules of that sort, however excellent they may be for little boys and servants and women, and even people in general, can't possibly be expected to apply to profound students and great thinkers and sages. No, Diggory, men like me, who possess hidden wisdom, are freed from common rules, just as we're cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny." As he said this, he sighed and looked so grave and noble and mysterious that for a second Diggory really thought he was saying something rather fine, but then he remembered the ugly look he'd seen on his uncle's face the moment before Polly had vanished. And all at once he saw through Uncle Andrew's grand words. All it means, he said to himself, is he thinks he can do anything he likes to get anything he wants. Of course, said Uncle Andrew, I didn't dare open the box for a long time, for I knew it might contain something highly dangerous. For my godmother was a very remarkable woman. The truth is, she was one of the last mortals in this country who had fairy blood in her. She said there'd been 2 others in her time. One was a duchess and the other was a charwoman. In fact, Diggory, you are now talking to the last man, possibly, who really had a fairy godmother. There, that'll be something for you to remember when you're an old man yourself. I bet she was a bad fairy, thought Diggory, and added out loud, but what about Polly? How you do harp on that, said Uncle Andrew, as if that was what mattered. My first task was, of course, to study the box itself. It was very ancient, and I knew enough even then to know it wasn't Greek or Old Egyptian or Babylonian or Hittite or Chinese. It was older than any of those nations. That was a great day when at last I found out the truth. The box was Atlantean. It came from the lost island of Atlantis. That meant it was centuries older than any of those Stone Age things they dig up in Europe. And it wasn't a rough, crude thing like them either. For in the very dawn of time, Atlantis was already a great city with palaces and temples and learned men. He paused for a moment as if he expected Diggory to say something, but Diggory was disliking his uncles more every minute, so he said nothing. Meanwhile, continued Uncle Andrew, I was learning a good deal in other ways. It wouldn't be proper to explain them to a child. About magic in general. That meant I came to have a fair idea of what sort of things might be in the box. By various tests, I narrowed down the possibilities. I had to get to know some devilishly queer people and go through some very disagreeable experiences. That's what turned my hair grey. One doesn't become a magician for nothing. My health broke down in the end, but I got better, and then at last, I actually knew. Although there was not the least chance of anyone overhearing them, he leaned forward and almost whispered as he said, the Atlantean box contains something that had been brought from another world when our world was only just beginning. What? Asked Diggory, who was now interested in spite of himself.